All right, let's talk about something we've all stared at with a mix of hope and dread, the test question. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and get into the surprising science and art of how a really good test question gets made. One that actually figures out what you know. Let's dive in. I mean, who hasn't had this feeling, right? You're in the middle of an exam, you read a question, and your brain just goes, wait a minute, this feels like a trap. It seems like it's intentionally confusing, more like a riddle than a real question. Well, turns out there's a reason for that, and it's probably not what you're thinking. And this is where things get really interesting. This quote gets right to the heart of the paradox we're talking about today. How on earth can multiple choice, a format that literally lets you guess, be one of the most reliable and valid ways to test what someone knows? It seems completely backward. But stick with me, and you'll see exactly why it's true. So, to wrap our heads around that paradox, we have to start with the absolute basics. First up, let's break down and crack the code of the most common question format out there, the multiple choice question. Every single multiple choice question is built from three key parts. First, you've got the stem. That's just the fancy word for the question itself. Then, obviously, you've got the one correct answer. But here's the most important part, the secret sauce, the distractors. These are the wrong answers, and believe me, they have a very specific job to do. And this, right here, is the absolute heart of what makes a good test. A great question isn't really defined by its correct answer. It's all about the quality of its wrong answers, those distractors. Their job is to look super appealing to someone who only kinda sorta knows the material. They're designed to separate that partial knowledge from real, solid understanding. And yeah, there are actual rules to this game. You want to have 4 or 5 options in total, because that really cuts down on the odds of a lucky guess. All the options have to be plausible. You can't just throw in a silly joke answer. It's also a really good idea to avoid negative words like not or except. Why? Because our brains are just better at remembering what something is than what it isn't. And finally, the question itself, the stem, has to be a complete question. Oh, and this is a classic mistake. Check out the bad example. The stem ends with The only answer that works grammatically is a mixture. The other option starts with a vowel sound, ingredients. It just sounds wrong. A savvy test taker doesn't even need to know what a mirepoix is to get this right. The well-written version fixes this by just asking a complete question. It forces you to actually know the stuff. Okay, so we've cracked the code on multiple choice. Now let's see how those same ideas show up in some other common test formats. Up next, matching items. You can basically think of these as a bunch of multiple choice questions all mushed together because they all share the same answer choices. The whole point is to check your knowledge across a whole topic, like these stat terms. And if it's designed right, it's really, really hard to just guess your way through it. And the rules for making them fair but challenging are simple, but really smart. First, you should always have more answers in that second column than you have questions in the first. That way, nobody can get the last one right just by process of elimination. Letting answers be used more than once also makes it tougher. And keeping the answers short and sweet just makes the whole thing easier to read and figure out. All right, what about true or false questions? You'd think these would be a piece of cake to write, right? I mean, it's just a statement. But the answer to this question on the screen? A big, fat false. They are surprisingly tricky to get right. And here's a perfect example of why. Test writers can get a little defensive. To make a true statement absolutely 100% waterproof true, they add all these extra details and exceptions. And what happens? The true statements end up being way longer and more complicated than the false ones. Smart students pick up on that pattern and can start guessing correctly just based on how long the sentence is. This brings us to fill-in-the-blank questions. The source material has a little fun here, kind of admitting they aren't technically selection questions since you have to supply the answer yourself, but they get lumped in with this family for one absolutely critical reason. The scoring is objective. There's one right answer, and that's it. Now, a huge trap with this format is what experts call a Swiss cheese item. A sentence with so many holes in it that it's just confusing. What is it even asking for? The real goal is to ask a super clear question with one single strategically placed blank, usually at the end. That way, the task is clear and focused. Okay, so now that we've seen how these questions are actually built, let's go all the way back to that big idea from the beginning. It's time to tackle that reliability paradox head-on, this battle between a student guessing and a grader being subjective. To do that, we need to get 2 key terms straight. First is validity. That just asks, is this test actually measuring what it says it's measuring? Is it testing deep understanding or just random facts you memorized? Then there's reliability, which asks, how much of this final score is just pure random luck? And here is the paradox in a nutshell. From one point of view, letting students guess adds a bunch of randomness, which makes the test less reliable. But if a student gets it right, that's pretty valid proof they actually knew that fact. On the other hand, having a computer score the test removes all human bias, which makes the score super reliable. But if the test only measures memorization, it might have really low validity when it comes to assessing deeper skills, like critical thinking. See the problem? So what's the takeaway here? The crucial point is that randomness can sneak into a test score from two different places, from the student who's guessing, or from the human grader whose scoring might be a little inconsistent. A really well-designed objective test tries to shut down both of those problems. The high-quality questions make guessing harder, and the objective scoring gets rid of any grader bias. It's all about finding that balance. So what does all this mean for you? Well, congratulations. You've basically just unlocked a new set of superpowers for taking tests. You can now spot those little grammar clues and overly wordy questions from a mile away. You get why the wrong answers matter even more than the right one. And most importantly, you can start to see tests not just as some annoying hurdle, but as a science with its own set of rules you can understand. So the next time you're sitting down for an exam, you'll know exactly what's going on behind the curtain. You know the rules of the game now. So the only real question left is, will you ever see a test the same way again? Thanks for tuning in.